The girl with the black backpack. 9-year-old Amara Reynolds skipped down Lincoln Avenue, her small black backpack bouncing with every step. The golden afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the sidewalk, making everything feel a little bigger, a little different. Normally, this was her favorite part of the day, walking home, making up songs in her head, pretending she was the hero of some grand adventure. But today, something felt off. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She slowed her steps, glancing over her shoulder. The street was mostly empty. Just a couple of cars parked by the curb, a few people sitting on their porches, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Shaking it off, she turned right onto Westfield Street, where the comforting smell of fresh bread and spices drifted from Rosa's kitchen, a tiny family-owned restaurant with faded green paint peeling from its wooden sign. The scent made Amara's stomach grumble, but she wasn't here to eat. She stepped inside, the little bell above the door jingling. "Amara," just in time, called Rosa, a plump woman with warm brown eyes and a floral apron dusted with flour. She was wiping her hands on a towel, smiling at the little girl like she had been expecting her. "I have something for you." Amara smiled shyly, shifting her weight from foot to foot as Rosa disappeared into the back. A moment later, she returned with a small brown paper bag. "Empanadas today," Rosa said, tucking a napkin inside. "Still warm." "Thank you, Ms. Rosa," Amara whispered, taking the bag and hugging it close to her chest. It smelled amazing, savory and rich, a little taste of kindness wrapped in flaky pastry. Rosa leaned down and lowered her voice. "How's your mama doing?" Amara hesitated. She didn't like talking about it too much. Her mother was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for. But life had been hard ever since the accident that left her in a wheelchair. Bills piled up. Some days, the fridge was nearly empty. "She's okay," Amara said finally. Rosa nodded, understanding more than the little girl let on. "You tell her I said hi, okay?" Amara nodded. "I will." As she turned to leave, Rosa's voice stopped her. "And Amara?" She looked back. "You're a good girl." Amara felt warmth bloom in her chest. She clutched the bag tighter and gave a small nod before stepping out onto the street again. But the moment she did, the uneasy feeling returned. This time, she was sure of it. Someone was watching her. Across the street, inside an unmarked police car, 2 officers sat in silence, eyes locked onto the little girl. Officer Kenton, a hardened man with graying hair, rested one arm on the steering wheel, his jaw set in a firm line. His gaze followed Amara's every move, his expression unreadable. His younger partner, Officer Ryan, frowned slightly. "She's just a kid," Ryan muttered. Kenton didn't take his eyes off her. "A kid who matches a description." Ryan glanced at the notepad resting on the dashboard. The report was vague. A little black girl, around 9 or 10 years old, suspected of stealing the candy bar from Greenway Market. That was it. No name. No concrete evidence. Just a complaint from the store owner and a shaky description. Ryan sighed. A candy bar. That's what we're tailing her for. Kenton's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. A crime is a crime. Ryan clenched his jaw. He had heard that phrase too many times. A crime is a crime. It didn't seem to matter to Kenton how small the crime was, or if there was even a crime at all. It didn't matter that the girl was a child. It didn't matter that she was alone. It didn't matter that the only thing in her hands was a small paper bag, probably filled with something barely enough for a meal. What mattered, it seemed, was that she fit the description. Ryan swallowed hard, looking at Amara through the windshield. She was walking faster now, her little frame tensed, her grip on the paper bag tight. She could sense them. Ryan exhaled slowly. They were following a little girl home over a candy bar. Something about that made his stomach turn. But he didn't say anything. And the car rolled forward. Inside Amara's backpack, tucked safely between her school books and a half-finished drawing, was a small, crumpled envelope. It contained a letter she had written to God. "Dear God, please take care of my mom. Please let her walk again. And please let people stop looking at me like I've done something wrong." She didn't know if God would read it, but she hoped. And as she hurried home, unaware of the officers trailing behind her, she whispered under her breath, "Please, just let me get home safe." The watchful eyes. Amara's small feet tapped against the pavement as she quickened her pace, the weight of her backpack pressing against her shoulders. The paper bag from Rose's kitchen was still clutched in her hands, its warmth beginning to fade. But something else was making her uneasy, the feeling of eyes on her. She cast another glance over her shoulder. Nothing. Just the usual street, rows of tired-looking apartment buildings, cracked sidewalks littered with leaves, and an old man sitting on his porch, swaying slightly in a rocking chair. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Across the street, hidden behind the tinted glass of an unmarked police car, Officers Kenton and Ryan watched her every move. Kenton's fingers tapped idly against the steering wheel, his sharp gray eyes locked onto the little girl. He had been on the force for over 2 decades, and to him, instincts meant everything. "She's nervous," he muttered. "Look at the way she's moving, looking over her shoulder like that." Ryan frowned but said nothing. A part of him wanted to ask, or maybe she just senses 2 grown men trailing her in a car. But he knew how Kenton worked. "Guilty people always look over their shoulders," Kenton added, shaking his head slightly. "They feel it in their bones when they've done something wrong." Ryan let out a slow breath, gripping his knee. Or maybe she just doesn't like being followed. Kenton's jaw tensed, but he didn't take his eyes off the girl. "We got a call, Ryan. You heard it yourself. Store owner says a little black girl, about 9 or 10, stole a candy bar from Greenway Market. That girl right there matches the description." Ryan glanced down at the notepad on the dashboard. The report was handwritten in rough, hurried script. "Black girl, 9 to 10 years old, stole candy bar." That was it. No camera footage, no actual proof, just a vague, half-baked accusation. A deep discomfort settled in Ryan's chest. "I don't know, man," he muttered, shifting in his seat. "Something about this doesn't sit right with me." Kenton scoffed. "A crime is a crime." Ryan clenched his jaw. He had heard those words too many times. Amara's fear grows. Amara's fingers curled tightly around the straps of her backpack as she turned onto Riverside Drive, the long stretch of cracked pavement that led to her apartment building. The afternoon sun had dipped lower, casting everything in a golden glow, but the warmth did nothing to settle her nerves. She was sure of it now. Someone was following her. She felt it. She glanced around again, more carefully this time. A car. A police car. The realization sent a bolt of panic through her small frame. Her feet moved faster. She wasn't quite running, but she was close. Why were the police following her? She thought back through her day, her heart pounding. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had gone to school, listened to Ms. Carter's lesson about fractions, played hopscotch with her friends at recess, and stopped by Rose's kitchen like she always did. Nothing bad. Nothing wrong. Then why? Did something happen to Mama? No, she would have gotten a call from someone at the hospital if that were the case. So why were they watching her like she was some kind of criminal? She thought about cutting through the alleyway behind the laundromat. It would shave a few minutes off her walk home, but her mama had always told her to stay on the main roads when walking alone. So she kept going, kept moving, hoping, praying that whoever was behind her wasn't really following her. The officers debate. Inside the car, Ryan shifted in his seat as Amara sped up. "She's scared," he said. Kenton exhaled through his nose. "Yeah, because she knows she got caught." Ryan turned to him, his stomach twisting. "You sure about that?" Kenton's eyes flicked toward him, his expression unreadable. Ryan pressed on, forcing his voice to stay even. "Look, man, we've been following this girl for 4 blocks now. She hasn't done anything suspicious. She stopped by a restaurant, probably getting food. That's it. Kenton's jaw tightened. That's all we saw. That doesn't mean that's all she did. Ryan ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, frustration bubbling up. You ever think about how this looks? Two cops in an unmarked car tailing a little girl through the neighborhood. Maybe she's looking over her shoulder because she's scared. Maybe she's not guilty. Maybe she's just a kid who doesn't like feeling hunted. Kenton didn't respond right away. Ryan exhaled sharply. Hell, man, when I was her age, I stole a pack of gum from a corner store once. He let out a humorless chuckle. You think someone called the cops on me for that? Kenton shot him a look. That's different. Ryan's stomach twisted. He knew what Kenton meant. He meant because you're white. He didn't say it, but he didn't need to. Ryan turned back to the road, watching as Amara disappeared around the corner. His chest tightened. This doesn't feel right, he said again, softer this time. Kenton was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. Fine. We won't stop her. Ryan blinked, surprised. But before relief could settle in, Kenton added, Not yet. Ryan's hands curled into fists. Amara reaches home. By the time Amara made it to her apartment building, her breath was uneven. She stopped just outside the front steps, pressing a small hand to her chest to steady her heartbeat. She turned one last time. The car had stopped at the end of the block, just sitting there, waiting. A sharp fear gripped her. She quickly climbed the steps, unlocking the door with trembling fingers. Mama, I'm home, she called as she stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. From the other room, Marissa Reynolds wheeled herself forward, her expression shifting from relief to concern when she saw her daughter's pale face. What's wrong, baby? She asked. Amara hesitated. Should she tell her? Should she say that the police had followed her home? That their car was still outside, watching? She swallowed hard, forcing a small smile. Nothing, Mama. She placed the bag of empanadas on the table. Marissa studied her daughter for a long moment, but finally, she sighed and smiled. Come sit with me, baby. Let's eat together. Amara nodded, pushing the fear away. But outside, the police car still sat at the curb. And inside, Officer Kenton's voice was quiet but firm. She's hiding something. Ryan closed his eyes. He had a bad feeling about this. Shadows at the door. Amara sat on the small, worn-out couch, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of a plate as she picked at the empanada in front of her. The smell of warm spices and crispy dough should have made her feel safe, should have comforted her like it always did. But the food sat heavy in her stomach. Her eyes flicked toward the window. The police car was still there, not moving, just sitting, watching. She hadn't told Mama. Mama had enough to worry about. Her legs, the bills, making sure they had enough food to last the week. She didn't need to stress about some cops sitting outside. But still, Amara forced herself to take a bite, even though it tasted like cardboard in her mouth. Across from her, Marissa Reynolds studied her daughter closely. The woman had always been able to read people. It was a skill she had learned growing up in a world that was often unkind to her. And right now, she could see the worry etched into Amara's small face. Baby, Marissa said gently, her voice warm but firm. What's wrong? Amara hesitated. She could still hear the warning in her mama's voice from years ago. If you ever get stopped by police, be respectful. Be polite. Do not run. Do not talk back. Just listen, okay, baby? Because not everybody sees you the way I do. The words were burned into her memory. She glanced down at her food. Nothing, Mama. Marissa sighed. She didn't believe that for a second. But before she could press further, knock, knock, knock. A heavy fist rapped against the front door. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Marissa's body stiffened. She knew that knock. The kind that wasn't friendly. The kind that didn't wait to be invited. The kind that demanded. Slowly, she set her plate down and pushed herself toward the door in her wheelchair. Amara scrambled to her feet. "Mama." "I got it, baby," Marissa murmured. Another knock, louder this time. Marissa's fingers curled around the lock. She took a steadying breath before pulling the door open just enough to see outside. Two white police officers stood on the doorstep. One older, stocky, his gray eyes cold and calculating. The other younger, shifting on his feet like he wasn't sure if he should be there at all. "Evening, ma'am," the older one said, flashing a tight-lipped smile. "I'm Officer Kenton. This is my partner, Officer Ryan. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Marissa's face remained unreadable. "Depends on what they're about." Kenton tilted his head slightly, like he was assessing her. "You got a daughter?" "About 9, 10 years old." Marissa's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. "Why?" Kenton sighed. "Look, ma'am, we got a report that a little girl matching your daughter's description was involved in a theft earlier today. We just need to clear a few things up." Marissa's grip on the doorknob tightened. "You mean you followed my baby home over a candy bar?" Kenton didn't blink. "A crime is a crime." Marissa exhaled slowly through her nose, schooling her expression. "Let me ask you something, officer. If it was a little white girl accused of taking the candy bar, would you have followed her home?" Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Kenton's expression hardened. "I don't see color, ma'am. I just see the law." Marissa let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "That's funny, because from where I'm sitting, you sure seem to be looking at one color real hard." Silence. Kenton's lips pressed into a thin line. "We're just doing our job, Mom." Marissa's voice remained calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Then do it right. Do you have proof my daughter stole anything?" Kenton hesitated for a fraction of a second. That was all Marissa needed to see. She let out a soft breath, shaking her head. "Didn't think so." She moved to close the door, but Kenton's hand shot out, pressing against the frame. Amara gasped. Ryan's eyes widened slightly. "Kenton." But Kenton didn't back down. His gaze flicked inside the apartment. "What's in the bag, ma'am?" Marissa's pulse quickened. "Excuse me." "That bag on the table. Where'd she get it?" Amara's stomach twisted. She took a small step forward. "It's from Rosa's kitchen," she said quietly. "Mrs. Rosa gives me food sometimes." Kenton's eyes didn't leave the bag. "Mind if we take a look?" Marissa's patience snapped. "Yes, I do mind." Ryan cut in quickly, his voice firm but cautious. "Kenton, let's go." Kenton didn't move. "We can ask the restaurant owner to confirm," he said flatly. Marissa glared. "You go do that. But until then, unless you got a warrant, you can get off my doorstep." Silence stretched thick and heavy. Finally, Kenton let out a slow exhale and took a step back, lowering his hand from the door. Ryan gave Marissa a small nod. "Thank you for your time, Mom." Marissa didn't respond. She just stared at them until they turned and walked away. When the door finally closed, she turned toward Amara. The little girl stood frozen in place, her hands balled into fists at her sides. Marissa's voice softened. "Baby." Amara looked up. And then, just like that, her tiny frame shook with sobs. Marissa wheeled forward immediately, pulling Amara into a tight embrace. "Shh, baby, I got you. I got you." Amara clung to her mother, her small fingers gripping the fabric of her shirt. "Mama, I didn't steal anything," she choked out. "I know, baby," Marissa whispered. "I know." She pressed a kiss to Amara's forehead, rocking her gently. And as she held her daughter close, Marissa made a silent promise. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The fire inside. The apartment was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the heavy kind. The kind that sat in the air like storm clouds before a downpour. Amara sat curled up on the couch, hugging her knees to her chest. Her plate of food sat untouched on the coffee table. The warm empanada, once inviting, had turned cold. Marissa watched her daughter from across the room, her fingers gripping the worn armrests of her wheelchair. Her heart ached at the sight of Amara. Small, scared, trying to shrink into herself like she could disappear. Marissa had spent years fighting. Fighting for food. Fighting for a roof over their heads. Fighting against the weight of the world pressing down on her and her daughter. But this wasn't something she could fight with money, or paperwork or grit. This was a system, one that saw her daughter as a suspect before a child. And that made something deep inside her burn. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Then she wheeled closer to the couch. "Baby," she murmured, reaching for Amara's small hand. "Come here." Amara hesitated, but after a second, she scooted closer. Marissa wrapped an arm around her, pressing a gentle kiss into her curls. "You listen to me," Marissa said softly, her voice low but firm. "You did nothing wrong. Do you hear me?" Amara nodded against her chest. Marissa tilted her chin up, so they were eye to eye. "I don't care what those men said. I don't care how they looked at you. You are not a thief. You are not a criminal. You are my daughter, and you hold your head up high. Always." Amara swallowed hard, her lip trembling. "But Mama, they looked at me like I was. She couldn't finish. Marissa knew. She knew exactly what her baby was trying to say. "Like you were already guilty," she whispered. Amara nodded. Marissa inhaled sharply through her nose, her nails pressing into the armrests. Her baby was 9 years old. 9. And already, she had been made to feel like she had to prove her innocence just for existing. Marissa felt a rage she hadn't felt in years. The last time she had been this furious was the day she'd been told she'd never walk again. The doctors had shaken their heads. The accident had been too severe. Her legs were gone. She would have to learn to live with it. And she had. But she had refused to let it break her. And she would be damned if she let this break her daughter. Her mind was already working. She knew what she had to do. "Baby," she said, brushing Amara's cheek. "I need you to stay home for a little while, okay? Just for a little bit." Amara's eyes widened. "Where are you going?" Marissa's lips curled into a small, determined smile. "To remind those officers exactly who they're messing with. The police station." Marissa's wheelchair rolled smoothly over the polished floors of the precinct, the scent of stale coffee and printer ink filling the air. She wasn't new to places like this. Hospitals, courthouses, welfare offices. She had spent years walking into buildings where the system was designed to work against her. She knew how to carry herself. She would not be small. She would not be intimidated. She rolled right up to the front desk. A tired-looking officer barely glanced at her. "Can I help you?" "Yes, you can," Marissa said, voice crisp. "I need to speak to the officers who followed my daughter home today." The officer blinked, then glanced at the logbook. You mean Kenton and Ryan?" "That's exactly who I mean." The officer hesitated. "And what's this about?" Marissa arched an eyebrow. "Did you not hear me?" The officer's mouth tightened, but he nodded. "One moment." Marissa waited. She did not fidget. She did not glance around nervously. She simply waited. And when Officers Kenton and Ryan finally walked out from the back office, she didn't so much as blink. "Ms. Reynolds," Kenton greeted, his tone flat, unreadable. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, well," Marissa said, folding her hands in her lap. "I didn't expect you to harass my 9-year-old daughter either." "Guess we're full of surprises." Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Kenton's jaw flexed. "Ma'am," Kenton started, "we were simply following up on a complaint. We have every right to investigate." "Investigate what exactly?" Marissa cut in, her voice sharp. "You had zero proof my daughter took anything. You had no footage, no witnesses, and yet you still followed her home. You knocked on my door like she was some kind of criminal." Kenton's expression darkened. "We were doing our jobs." Marissa let out a humorless chuckle. "Let me ask you something, Officer Kenton," she said, tilting her head. "How many little white girls did you follow home today?" Silence. Kenton's fingers twitched. "I don't see color, Mom." Marissa scoffed. "That's a damn lie, and you know it." Ryan finally spoke up, his voice cautious. "Ms. Reynolds, I understand your frustration." "No," Marissa snapped, her eyes flicking toward him. "You don't understand. You will never understand what it's like to raise a black child in a world that already sees them as guilty before they even open their mouth. You will never understand the fear I feel every single day when she leaves the house, wondering if she'll come home safe." Ryan swallowed hard. He had no words for that. Kenton, however, smirked slightly. "Ma'am, are you implying we're racist?" Marissa leaned forward slightly. "I don't have to imply a damn thing. Your actions speak loud enough." Kenton's smirk faltered. Marissa let her words linger. Then she took a breath. "You crossed a line today," she said, her voice quieter now. "And I want to make one thing very, very clear to both of you." She set her hands on the armrests of her wheelchair. "If you ever, and I mean ever, harass my daughter again." Her eyes locked onto Kenton's. "I will make sure everyone in this damn city hears about it. The department, the news, the mayor, everyone. Do you understand me?" Ryan nodded quickly. Kenton clenched his jaw. Marissa smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. "Good. Then I'd say we're done here." She turned her wheelchair around without another word. And as she rolled toward the exit, her head high, her shoulders square, she knew this fight wasn't over. Not yet. But they had just learned one thing very clearly. Marissa Reynolds was not the kind of woman to back down. The battle begins. Marissa wheeled out of the police station with her head high, but inside, her heart pounded. She had won the battle, but not the war. Her daughter had been followed home like a criminal, judged not by her actions, but by the color of her skin. And as much as she had put officers Kenton and Ryan on notice, she knew deep in her gut, this wasn't over. She had seen the look in Kenton's eyes. That cold, dismissive smirk that said, "You think you made a difference. You didn't." That look had followed Marissa all her life. Doctors telling her she would never walk again. Landlords who heard single black mother and suddenly had no available apartments. Employers who saw her wheelchair and assumed she was a burden instead of an asset. She knew that look. She had fought against that look her whole life. And now, they were coming for her daughter. Not on her watch. Marissa exhaled sharply and pulled out her phone. She wasn't just going to fight back. She was going to make noise. She tapped on her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't dialed in years. Leona Parker. Investigative journalist. Marissa hesitated for only a second before pressing call. The phone rang twice before a voice answered. "Marissa." "Leona," Marissa said, cutting straight to the point. "I have a story for you." A storm brewing. By the time Marissa returned home, Amara had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up with a book still open on her chest. Marissa sat beside her, brushing her daughter's curls from her face. She looked so small, so peaceful. Marissa's heart clenched. She knew Amara wasn't truly okay. Children didn't just bounce back from things like this. And why should they have to? Her fingers tightened. She had done everything she could to protect her daughter from the world's cruelty. But no matter how much she fought, how much she sacrificed, it always came knocking. A soft knock sounded at the door. Marissa frowned. It was late. She glanced at the peephole, then stiffened. Officer Ryan. Her mind immediately raced. Was this retaliation? Another follow-up. She opened the door only halfway, keeping her expression guarded. "Can I help you, officer?" Ryan looked uncomfortable. "Ms. Reynolds, I just wanted to apologize." Marissa's fingers tightened on the doorframe. "Apologize." Ryan nodded, shifting his weight. "I know what happened today wasn't right. I didn't agree with how it was handled." Marissa studied him carefully. She had met officers like Ryan before, the ones who weren't actively racist, but who stood by and let it happen. The ones who said, "I don't agree," but still did nothing to stop it. "You didn't agree," she echoed, voice flat. Ryan flinched slightly. "I tried to say something," he defended. "But Kenton," he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Look, I just wanted to tell you that I see what's wrong with this system. I just don't know how to fix it." Marissa let out a bitter chuckle. "Must be nice," she murmured. Ryan frowned. "What?" "To just now be realizing how broken the system is," she said, crossing her arms. "To have the privilege of not knowing until it's staring you in the face." Ryan looked away, shame flickering in his expression. Marissa sighed, her shoulders relaxing. Just a little. She wasn't angry at him, not in the way she was at Kenton. But she had no patience left for empty words. "You want to fix it?" she asked quietly. "Then do something. Speak up. Be better, because until then, your apology doesn't mean much to me." Ryan swallowed hard, nodding. "I will." Marissa didn't respond. She simply closed the door. And as she did, she knew this was only the beginning. The article that shook the city. 2 days later, Marissa sat at her kitchen table, phone buzzing nonstop. The article had gone viral. 9-year-old girl harassed by police over false accusation. Mother fights back. The story had been picked up by local news, then national outlets. People were outraged. Marissa scrolled through the comments online. "This is disgusting. That poor baby. This is why we need police reform. How do we protect our black children when this is what they face? And then, where's the accountability? What's the department doing about this?" That was the question. What was the department doing? Marissa's phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. She answered. "Hello. Ms. Reynolds, this is Captain Harris from the precinct. I believe we need to talk." Marissa's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. That's what she thought. The reckoning. The air in the police precinct was heavy with tension. Officers spoke in hushed voices, their gazes shifting toward the captain's office, where a storm was brewing. Inside, Captain Harris sat behind his desk, his fingers laced together, his expression unreadable. Across from him sat Marissa Reynolds, her back straight, her eyes locked onto his. She wasn't intimidated. Not by him. Not by the system. Not anymore. Her phone lay on the table, the article still open on the screen. Harris had undoubtedly read it. The whole city had. "So," Marissa said, breaking the silence, "I assume you didn't call me here to apologize." Harris exhaled through his nose, his gaze unreadable. "Ms. Reynolds, let's be clear. The department is taking this incident seriously." Marissa let out a humorless laugh. "Are you?" His jaw tightened. "Officer Kenton has been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation." "Administrative leave?" Marissa repeated, her voice sharp. "That's a vacation. He harassed my child, followed her home, treated her like a suspect based on nothing. And you're giving him a paid break." Harris leaned forward. "This isn't as simple as you think." "Oh, I think it is," Marissa shot back. "If my daughter had been a little white girl, none of this would have happened. You and I both know it." Harris' expression flickered, just for a second. Marissa pounced on it. "You called me here to contain the damage," she continued, her voice unwavering. "But I didn't come for a meeting. I came for justice. And I won't leave without it." Harris was silent for a long moment. Then, with a sigh, he picked up a file from his desk. "You should know something, Ms. Reynolds," he said, flipping it open. "Officer Kenton has a history of complaints." Marissa's stomach turned. Of course he did. He's been reported for unnecessary stops, racial profiling, and excessive force. Harris continued. But nothing ever stuck. Not enough proof. Not enough witnesses willing to speak. Marissa clenched her fists. This was exactly the problem. "And now?" she asked. Harris exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Now we have an entire city watching." Marissa didn't blink. Good. So what's the department going to do about it? The captain hesitated, but then he finally said, "We're reopening his past complaints. If there's a pattern, we'll push for termination." It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. Marissa stood. Do it. And while you're at it, implement some real policies to protect kids like my daughter from ever going through this again. Harris nodded, but his eyes held something else. Respect. Marissa had walked in as a mother demanding justice. She was leaving as a force to be reckoned with. The breaking point. Outside, reporters were already gathering, waiting for her to speak. Officer Ryan was among them, standing off to the side, his expression tight. As Marissa stepped into the sunlight, microphones were shoved toward her. "Ms. Reynolds, what happened in the meeting? Will Officer Kenton be fired? How is your daughter?" Marissa took a steady breath, then spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the crowd. "My daughter is 9 years old. She was followed home by an armed officer because of a baseless accusation. This isn't just about her. This is about every black child who grows up afraid of the people meant to protect them. The police department has a choice. Sweep this under the rug, or fix the problem." The cameras flashed. The world was listening. And Marissa knew this was only the beginning. Epilogue. A new dawn. A week later, Officer Kenton was formally dismissed from the force. His past complaints, ones that had been ignored for years, had finally caught up with him. The department announced a new policy: mandatory de-escalation training, bias education, and increased oversight on officers with repeated complaints. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a cure. But it was a step forward. And Amara, she still skipped down Willow Creek Road, her backpack bouncing, her laughter filling the air. Because Marissa had made sure that her daughter, and every child like her, would never walk home in fear again.